This is Glenn from the blog, UnContained.co. I'm outside today on the shores of Lake Superior. It was supposed to be a nice day out. The forecast was for a nice day, and now we're calling for snow. The waves behind me indicate we're in for a good snowstorm tonight, at least a good snow squall. So that's how fast things change in our industry. I want to go over some safety and some concerns about winter work on geosynthetics. I'm going to move to an area where you can hear me. Again, I'm talking about cold weather, the impacts it has on safety, as well as quality geosynthetics installations. The first thing I'll touch on is safety. A few things that come to mind other than the basic safety protocols that should already be covered, such as keeping warm clothes, extra blankets and things when you're driving and working in these kind of conditions. But one of the main ones, as far as vehicles go, that I can't emphasize enough is making sure that your de-icing fluid, your windshield washer fluid, is actually rated for cold weather. I've been driving here to the Upper Peninsula, Michigan in the winter, 10 degrees to 0 degrees, and I hit the washer fluid. It sprays out if I'm lucky, and it freezes on my windshield. Not good when you're going 50, 60 miles an hour in cold weather, or faster or slower. Regardless, it's not good. Number two, icy, slippery conditions. Whether it's frost, snow, freezing rain, any of those are going to have an impact on the traction you're going to be able to get, especially on top of geosynthetics, especially if they're smooth. But even if they're textured, you can slip and fall a lot easier when you have cold weather going on where you're getting freezing conditions. Same thing on the earthwork. Frozen compacted clay soil is very slippery, especially slopes. You can fall before you realize it's even slippery. Another thing we've been dealing with here on a few projects of ours, even with a textured liner, we're having where the texture material is inconsistent. It doesn't have the same asperity height. It's almost missing in spots. So if you have that condition and you're relying on the friction of the texture to walk up and down the slope, all of a sudden you may slip and fall because of the material conditions combined with the weather conditions. Number three, a big safety item this year as crews push to get done is having adequate lighting. A lot of crews go to night shift, partial night shift, working beyond when sunset happens. So you need to make sure that there's adequate lighting out there, not only from a quality standpoint, but really from a safety perspective. Know where the light plants are, know where all your equipment is at, know the work plan. It's especially important to have details and work box meetings, tailgate meetings, whatever you want to call them, at break times and anytime the plans change, to make sure everybody's on the same page. A fourth thing that I can think of is that on several of our projects we've gone to working in tents. Obviously the tents now become kind of a confined space, so you need to make sure that you have proper ventilation in there. Depending on what type of heaters you're using, it may even be worth having personal alarms or a carbon monoxide detector in the tents. There's something that's often overlooked, especially when crews are in a hurry and everybody's trying to get the project done. And one of the final safety things off the top of my head is planning for the night shift. Like I mentioned, crews are going to night shift, but you want to make sure that you have adequate manpower out there, that people aren't working too long of shifts that they're getting overly tired, especially from a quality assurance standpoint, but also the installer and any of the other contractors as well. If you have people working 16 hours a day and then they're coming back and 4 or 5 hours of sleep, eventually that's going to catch up with them and accidents are going to happen. And that's one thing we all want to avoid on the project. So having a staffing plan when these cold weather projects take off is highly important, and I recommend it. All right, now I'm going to talk to you about some of the quality aspects that come to the top of my mind in thinking about cold weather seaming and some of the projects we're involved in already this year and the feedback we're getting. One of the big things is the cold weather seaming plan. there needs to be a cold weather seaming plan, whether it's GM9 or a modified version. Everybody, the contractor, the installer, the owner, and the QA all need to be on the same page as far as what's going to happen, how's it going to happen, the timing of things, and they need to be spelled out so it don't cause delays and confusion on the project, and that'll lead to better quality. When dealing with the cold weather as well, there should be a plan for removing snow. What are you going to do with all this snow if it's on the liner, on the subgrade? How are you going to prepare the subgrade? How are you going to remove it? How are you going to remove it without damaging the subgrade or the geosynthetics? So that needs to be something that's discussed, whether it's in your cold weather seaming plan or at a construction meeting. There needs to be a plan for removing any snow, ice, any of that that's going to interfere with the quality of the work and the safety of the work. I mentioned the cold weather seaming plan. There's a lot of things in there that need to be resolved by the engineer ahead of time. One of the things that I like to see as far as protocol goes is making sure that your trial welds are tested in a controlled environment. They should be warmed up naturally, allowed to stabilize, and tested in a warm environment around the 70-degree Fahrenheit. That's pretty standard for laboratory testing. And on top of testing them in the controlled environment, I also recommend that a quality assurance person be monitoring the testing of the trial seams. One of the components of GM9 that's often used is that the engineer has a discretion to back off the trial seams destructive based on results. Well, I think it's important, if it's going to be based on the results, that the QA actually observe it and not just take the word of the installer that the trial seams are passing. There's a lot of times where things get crazy and you don't have enough manpower, but one of the things I definitely would focus on is watching trial seams if an engineering decision is going to be based on it. Another thing that needs to be thought about is rub sheets. A lot of times rub sheets are going to be used when cold weather welding over compacted clay liners. Are those rub sheets allowed to stay below the liner? Are they going to be mobile and pulled by the installer? If they're going to be mobile and pulled by the installer, then the trial weld should actually represent those type of conditions to make sure that that pulling is not messing up the weld. If they're going to be left in place, another consideration is if an electrical leak location survey is going to be performed, because if that geomembrane is left below the seam, the electrical leak location probably won't work below the seam in that area where the extra liner prohibits the compacted clay liner from contacting the original geomembrane. Heat tack patches are another one of my big concerns all year long, really, regardless of the temperature, but especially when it comes to cold weather seaming. Any patches that are heat tacked down and not permanently welded that shift should be removed and replaced with a larger patch. You're going to get moisture trapped in between the layers. When you go to weld it, if it's not removed, that moisture is going to be drawn to the weld and you're going to get failing welds or inferior welds. Another thing to keep in mind is if the crew is going to work night shift, one of the times that I found a big failure rate of destructs is during that transition from night to dark where the temperature switches and you're going from a warm liner to a cool liner and you get condensation. You need to make sure that the crew is cleaning adequately, keeping it dry, preheat if necessary. It might slow things down, but again, you want to make sure that you have a quality weld at the end of the day. One of the big things for the installer QC and the quality assurance personnel, third party, make sure you're working together, make sure everything's documented on a timely basis each day. When you're done with a shift, you ideally should have everything documented for that day, because you get the snow, you're not going to be able to find things. And some of the things are obvious, like the seams, they're not going to be as big a deal, but if you have damages, you want to make sure that you have all the damages referenced so that you can find them again. And you know, if you have 6 inches of snow and you're almost done with the project, you want to be able to find any holes, get them cleared off so that you can make the repair. So keeping up on the documentation is extremely critical this time of year. And another thing that's extremely critical this time of year is coordination with a surveyor. If you have somebody doing an as-built surveyor, an off-site surveyor, third party, whatever the case may be, even installers, you should keep up with it on a regular basis, because if it snows, you get bad weather, all of a sudden you're going to lose your intersections, you're going to lose your patches, you're going to lose your repairs. So you want to know where all those things are at, and make sure, keep an eye on the forecast, although as we know it always changes, it's not 100%. But you can use sandbags to reference the corners so things can be easy to find, cones, things like that. Just a trick of the trade is to use something that can be found again, but of course then you have to remove it again, and if it's a sandbag and it's frozen, it probably weighs 100 pounds by the time you're done, but you guys can figure that out. I'm just giving you the tip. Another thing this time of year is with the rush, projects get delayed, projects are being pushed, the weather may impact a project 50 miles away. All of a sudden you're out there and you have 2 or 3 additional liner crews jumping on one project, so you go from a dozen people to 2 dozen to 3 dozen people out there, and they're all trying to work together to get the project blown out. That poses a safety challenge first, and that needs to be dealt with by the installer crew and the owner, make sure everybody's on the same page. But secondly, there needs to be communication between parties before this happens, so that there can be planning made by the QA to have enough quality assurance personnel out there to cover all the activities that are going to go on, and to understand fully the timing, so that if there is going to be double shifts, round the clock work, that adequate staffing again can be made. It's a way to get the project done, but it needs to be proper communication and adequate coverage from a quality safety standpoint. Another concern for both quality and safety is the wildlife. This time of year, I got an orange hat on because I'm out in the woods where deer hunting is going on, so although it's my own private property, I should be safe, but you never know who's roaming around. And wildlife this time of year gets pushed from different places with the hunting pressure that's going on. So all of a sudden you may come in the morning and there's deer in the bottom of a lagoon. Well, that's a safety issue, especially if it's cold, because they're not going to be able to get out more than likely, at least on a geosynthetic geomembrane project. And if they do get out, you need to fully inspect it again, and should be inspecting it every day just to see if there's tracks, if there's any damage been performed to the liner, because the animals will come and go this time of year. It seems especially more this time of year in my experience, and even in the summer and early spring. All right, again, I'm Glenn with the blog Uncontained. I hope you found this helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in the field.